My husband and I were at the supermarket, and our baby was being especially fussy. To calm her down, he took her for a quick drive, as the car's motion usually soothed her. It only took about 10 minutes to settle her, while I remained inside the store, unsure how much longer I'd be and dealing with poor cell reception. He returned to the parking lot to wait. It was a warm, unseasonably nice day, so he decided to sit on one of the benches outside the store, with our baby still in her car seat. He took a business call, absent-mindedly rocking the carrier, when a well-dressed woman approached. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, with an average height and a fit build. It's not uncommon for people to want to interact with our baby. With her big rosy cheeks, soft wisps of golden hair, and an adorable toothless grin, she often draws attention, especially when she's napping so peacefully. However, her nap schedule is critical, so my husband prepared to explain that she couldn't be disturbed. But the woman didn't wait for an invitation or even finish listening to him. She strode up with unnerving confidence, lifted the carrier, and began walking away. For a moment he froze, shocked that someone would be so brazen in broad daylight. "Excuse me, put her down," he called after her, his voice growing louder as panic set in. The woman remained calm, but quickened her pace. Realizing the gravity of the situation, he sprinted after her, attempting to retrieve the carrier. She resisted, forcing him to restrain her arms while shouting for help. And then the nightmare began. "Help!" she screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. "He's trying to take my baby, kidnapping." Her words caught the attention of everyone nearby. A man rushed forward and tackled my husband to the ground, pinning him. The woman clung to the carrier, acting distraught and insisting she just wanted to leave. She even gestured toward a minivan parked nearby, solidifying her ruse. My husband pleaded with the crowd, his voice cracking. "She's my daughter. Check my phone. I have pictures of her." But his frantic words only deepened their suspicions. To them, a lone man in a casual Deadpool t-shirt couldn't possibly be telling the truth against the composed demeanor of this well-dressed woman. Then someone kicked him in the ribs. It was at that moment I emerged from the store. My chest tightened at the scene, my husband restrained on the ground, surrounded by shouting strangers. At first I thought he was being robbed. I screamed for security, my voice thin and strained. And then I noticed something even worse. Our baby wasn't with him. I scanned the parking lot and spotted a woman walking briskly away with our baby's carrier. Relief washed over me briefly, as I assumed she was protecting our daughter. But as I approached the commotion around my husband, the accusations hit me like a freight train. He tried to abduct that woman's kid. The words were incomprehensible. My husband? Kidnapping? We have 4 children. Stealing another would be the last thing on his mind. And then, in an instant, it all clicked. That woman wasn't protecting my baby. She was taking her. I went into full tiger mother mode. Adrenaline surged as I kicked off my heels and sprinted across the parking lot, shouting for her to stop. I caught up to her, grabbed her by the hair, and yanked with all my strength. She shrieked, but held tight to the carrier. Desperation drove me to clutch her throat, but she fought back, trying to escape. Finally, I pulled hard enough to make her drop the carrier. Overcome with emotion, I collapsed onto it, wrapping myself around it like a shield. The woman fled, blending into the crowd, and to my disbelief, no one stopped her. Even as she left without the child she claimed was hers, the bystanders remained unconvinced. They insisted my husband was guilty, clinging to the story she had fed them. When the police arrived, I hoped for justice, but to my horror, their initial questions were as insulting as they were dismissive. "Do your husband and the baby look dissimilar? Is there a chance she thought he was abducting the baby and she was trying to intervene? Could your husband have been doing something inappropriate or violent to the baby that would make her feel compelled to extricate the baby from the situation? Did she seem groggy or confused? Could she have mistaken either of them for her own family members?" They spent more time verifying that the baby was mine than investigating the fact that she clearly wasn't hers. My husband, by then, had called his brother, who worked in an office full of lawyers. He was connected with one immediately, and the advice he received was priceless. Get the name and badge number of every officer on the scene. Demand copies of the store's security tapes. Escalate the complaint higher up the chain if the officers weren't taking it seriously. Finally, the tone shifted, and we began to feel like we were being taken seriously. The officers even asked if my husband wanted to press charges against the man who had kicked him. Though still seething with rage and dealing with 2 cracked ribs, he declined. The man had been genuinely convinced he was protecting a child, and had stayed to apologize once the truth became clear. We eventually went home, still shaken and emotionally drained. We cried together until it was time to pick up our other kids from school. But even then, the day wasn't done. Some bystanders lingered, casting suspicious looks at my husband. One even urged the police to involve CPS to confirm the baby was really ours. It was a bitter reminder of how easily perception and assumptions had turned us into villains in the eyes of strangers. That day taught us a chilling truth. Even when the facts are clear, people will cling to their first impressions. And while we're grateful to have our daughter safe and sound, the haunting memory of how close we came to losing her will stay with us forever. There's something unnervingly quiet about a college town during winter break. The streets, once alive with laughter and movement, become desolate. It's the kind of silence that amplifies every creak of a floorboard, every gust of wind against a window pane. Last week, I learned that silence can carry something far worse, something that defies explanation. I live alone in a small duplex near campus. It's a peaceful area, mostly residential, and usually I don't mind the solitude. But last Wednesday night, as I drifted off to sleep, I was jolted awake by a sound that sent shivers down my spine. It was crying. Not the kind of crying you'd expect from someone in pain or grief, but a bizarre, almost theatrical wailing. Ooh, oh. It sounded human but off, like someone imitating a ghost with unnerving accuracy. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, straining to make sense of it. The cries didn't carry any pleas for help. No sobbing or words, just that strange, eerie moaning that seemed to drift aimlessly in the night. I crept to the window, pulling the curtain aside, but the street was empty. The sound was everywhere and nowhere, echoing in the darkness. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it faded into silence. I tried to convince myself it was a drunken prank or some eccentric neighbor, but the truth, I didn't sleep well that night. The next night, I lay in bed, restless, wondering if I'd hear it again. Around 2 a.m., I did, but this time, it wasn't crying. It started with what sounded like the scrape of a shovel against concrete. Long, deliberate, rhythmic. Thud, thud, scrape. The sound repeated, methodical and measured, growing louder with each cycle. I pulled myself out of bed and walked to the window again. Outside, the street was shrouded in a thick fog. At first, I saw nothing, but then my eyes caught movement across the street. A woman. She was elderly, hunched, with shoulders curled forward, like she was carrying an invisible weight. Her hair, or what I thought was a hat at first, was filthy and tangled, twisted into a massive matted ball that glistened unnaturally in the dim light. She was performing some kind of dance. She would take 2 heavy stomps forward, then glide across the pavement in an impossibly smooth motion, her feet making that scraping sound. Thud, thud, scrape. The glide was too perfect, as if she were on ice skates, but the street was bare. No snow, no ice, just asphalt. Her frailty made the dance even more unsettling. She moved with an elegance that didn't belong to someone her age. She twirled, spun, and glided with the grace of a professional, her movements hypnotic and grotesque at the same time. I couldn't look away. Then, without warning, she stopped mid-dance. Her body hunched further, almost folding in on itself, as she stooped low to the ground, like a runner preparing to sprint. She stayed like that, motionless, for what felt like an eternity. My breath caught in my throat. Something about her stillness felt more threatening than her movement. When she finally stood up, she turned away from me, rose onto her tiptoes, and stretched her arms wide like a ballerina taking a bow. Then, with startling speed, she began that rapid, cartoonish tiptoe scamper you see in old animations, darting into the fog without a sound. And just like that, she was gone. I haven't seen her since. But something about those nights lingers, like a stain on my mind. I've walked that same street in the daylight, passing the spot where she danced. But it feels different now. The quiet of this town, once comforting, has turned oppressive, as though something is watching, waiting for the fog to return. I don't know who or what I saw that night, but the rhythmic sound of thud, thud, scrape still echoes in my head, and when the fog rolls in, I close my blinds. You never think your first apartment will become a living nightmare. It's supposed to be exciting, a milestone in adulthood, the place where you build your life. For me and my boyfriend at the time, our little one-bedroom apartment in a quiet town seemed perfect. It was our escape from dorm life, a sanctuary with no roommates and just enough space for us and our growing little family of pets. But what we didn't realize was that sharing a duplex with strangers could make even the walls feel unsafe. Our apartment was on the ground floor, tucked into a building with only 4 units. To the rear, a cemetery stretched out in eerie stillness. We used to joke that at least our neighbors were quiet. We couldn't have been more wrong. The first sign that something was off came early. A loud slam echoed from upstairs, then another and another. For 10 minutes straight, our upstairs neighbor slammed his door, shaking the walls and rattling the windows. We sat, frozen, confused. What had we done? Over time, we learned his pattern. If he felt we'd done something wrong, he'd make sure we knew it by slamming his door, always for 10 minutes at a time. No explanations, no conversations, just a pounding declaration of his displeasure. The night before our wedding, we were exhausted after a long day of work and errands. My fiancée, sensing my pre-wedding anxiety spiraling, stopped outside the car to comfort me. As we stood in the parking lot, trying to catch our breath, the neighbor stormed down the stairs. "You've been making noise all day. How dare you be so inconsiderate?" he screamed, his face twisted in fury. My fiancée, protective and fed up, told him to back off. But the tension lingered as we went inside, where we learned the root of his rage, our cat tree. Every time our cat jumped on it, it bumped the wall, apparently sending him into a fit. We moved the tree, thinking it would solve the problem. It didn't. Despite our attempts to appease him, even going as far as suggesting he message us directly when he had an issue, the slamming continued, and when we tried reporting him to the property managers, we hit a brick wall. The man in the upstairs unit across from him dismissed our claims, saying it wasn't possible. Living there became unbearable. Fast forward to late 2021. My husband had gotten a promotion, and we were preparing to move across the country. He left early to start his new job while I stayed behind to finish packing. Alone, I became hyper-aware of every sound. I tiptoed through the apartment, using headphones for everything, determined to keep the peace. One evening, after spending the day loading up a U-Haul, I vacuumed the empty living room and took out the trash. When I returned, I locked the door, a habit I was still getting used to, and settled down with my headphones and TikTok. That's when I heard the pounding. My stomach dropped as I recognized the voice yelling through the door. It was him. "I'm going to kill you," he screamed, fists slamming against the wood. My dog whimpered, trying to crawl into my lap, while my cat hissed at the window. I froze, heart racing, as the pounding grew louder. Then I heard the sound of the doorknob rattling. He was trying to get in. Hands shaking, I called 911, whispering into the phone that my neighbor was threatening me. The operator stayed calm, assuring me help was on the way. Minutes stretched into eternity until I heard sirens outside. When the police arrived, they took him away. But even with him gone, I couldn't stop shaking. That night, I stayed with a friend. My mom drove 4 states to help me pack the rest of the apartment, and we left earlier than planned. I thought I could leave it all behind, but the nightmares followed me. Halfway across the country, I got a call from the hospital where he'd been admitted. They informed me he'd been released and was still threatening me. They urged me to get a protective order, but I was already too far away. In the end, we reached a plea agreement. He moved to Alaska to live with his parents, with the condition that he seek mental health treatment. I agreed to drop the charges in exchange for his compliance. But the damage was done. Even now, years later, I've changed. I lock the door the moment I step inside. I have a trained pit bull who sleeps at my side, and I'll never forget the sheer terror of hearing someone threaten my life from just a few feet away. They say your first apartment is supposed to teach you independence. Mine taught me to never take safety for granted.